I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. It was late, close to midnight, and I had gotten up quietly to warm the rice bag I used for my knees. The living room was dark, but the kitchen light was still on. That's where I heard them, my son and his wife, whispering like the walls didn't have ears. "She'll be gone soon," Claudette said, her voice sharp as the vinegar she kept wiping counters with. My son Matthew didn't say anything. Just silence. Then the fridge door opened and I heard a bottle clink against the shelf. "She's old, Matt," she continued. "She doesn't even know half of what's going on anymore. We just need to be patient." I stood behind the hallway corner, heart pounding harder than it had in years. Gone? Was that their plan? Was I now just a waiting game? I had moved in with them 6 months ago after my blood pressure dropped dangerously low and my doctor suggested I not live alone anymore. Matthew had offered before I even asked. Said, "Of course, Mama. Your family. You belong with us." But now here I was, overhearing my own exit being discussed like I was some moldy box left in the attic too long. She said it like I had already packed my bags and just didn't know it yet. "She'll be gone soon." That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. And that's when I decided, if someone was going to leave, it wasn't going to be me. What they didn't know was that I was paying attention. I saw everything, remembered everything. I had stayed silent out of respect. But now, respect had left the room long before I did. So I started listening closer, watching tighter and planning deeper. Because if Claudette thought I was going to fade away quietly, she picked the wrong grandmother. And if Matthew wasn't going to stand up for me, I would have to do it myself. But first, I needed to find out what else they were hiding. Because I had a feeling this wasn't just about space. The next morning, I acted as if I hadn't heard a thing. I sat at the breakfast table, hands wrapped around my chipped floral mug, nodding politely while Claudette buzzed around the kitchen, her voice overly sweet. "You sleep all right, Marlene?" she asked. I looked up slowly and smiled. "Like a baby." She blinked, probably unsure whether to believe me. Good. Let her wonder. Matthew was already gone, left early for work at the car dealership. I watched as Claudette tapped away on her phone between wiping non-existent crumbs from the counter. Her nails clicked louder than usual. She was nervous. That made two of us. But only one of us was hiding something for survival. I took my tea into the den, sat by the window and opened my journal. I hadn't written in it in months. But now I had a reason. Page 1. They think I'm not listening. They think I'm already halfway gone. Let's see who's wrong. That same day I started paying closer attention to the little things. The mail. Claudette had started bringing it in herself and never left it on the table like she used to. I once saw her slide a thick white envelope into her purse before I even reached the door. The bank? Gone was the stack of statements with my name on it. And then there was the medicine. I knew exactly how many blood pressure pills were in my organizer. But 2 were missing. I counted twice. I was sure. That was when I stopped swallowing the ones she gave me from her palm. I started tucking them beneath my tongue and spitting them out in the bathroom. I'd refill them myself next time. She wouldn't know I knew. I wasn't just being paranoid. Something was wrong. And if I didn't start pulling back the curtain, I was going to end up on the other side of it. Forgotten, silenced, maybe even harmed. That night, I waited until they went to bed. Then I walked quietly into the living room, lifted the flap on Claudette's purse, and took out the envelope I'd seen her hide earlier. It wasn't addressed to her. It was from the county. My name was at the top. Property Records Division. My hand trembled. Inside was a notice of ownership transfer request. The house I sold last year, after my doctor warned me to simplify my assets, hadn't just been sold. Someone had requested that the proceeds be rechanneled into a shared family trust. Only the trust didn't list me. It listed Claudette and Matthew, but not me. My breath caught in my throat. I tucked the paper back in place quietly, carefully. Then I backed out of the living room and into my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. That's when it hit me. They weren't just waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for me to disappear. And they'd already started clearing the path. 2 days after I found the trust papers, Claudette offered me tea. It was peppermint, my favorite. But I didn't drink it. Not because I thought it was poisoned. I wasn't living in a mystery novel. But it was something else. It was the way she handed it to me, eyes fixed on mine like she was waiting. Watching. She smiled too quickly. Her hands moved too deliberately. I thanked her, set the mug down gently on the table and never touched it again. She didn't ask why. Maybe she already knew. That night, I called my friend Lorraine from church. I hadn't spoken to her since Christmas, but I remembered her daughter worked as a paralegal. When Lorraine answered, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just said, I need someone to help me understand a trust. And maybe help me understand how someone could steal a life right out from under a mother's feet. Lorraine didn't ask for details. She just said, come by tomorrow. So I did. Lorraine lived just 20 minutes away in a cozy cottage filled with cross-stitch pillows and lemon cookies. Her daughter, Dana, sat across from me at the kitchen table and flipped through a copy of the trust one had photographed with my flip phone. After 10 minutes she looked up and said, Marlene, this is serious. If this was filed without your knowledge, and if your name's been removed from financial documents related to your house sale, that's fraud. My throat tightened. Can they really do this? Not legally, but quietly. Yeah. Especially if no one's looking. Especially if someone says you're not well. I blinked. Not well. My voice dropped. Do you think they're trying to make it seem like I'm mentally slipping? Dana leaned back. Wouldn't be the first time someone built that story around a senior, especially if there's money involved. That's when I remembered something else. Last month, Claudette had asked if I was feeling more confused lately. Then she made a joke about how I was always forgetting where I put things. She said it in front of Matthew. At the time I laughed it off. Now it felt like a seed, planted, waiting to grow. By the time I got back to the house, it was evening. Matthew was outside mowing the lawn. I watched him through the kitchen window. His back was broad, strong. He looked like the boy I once held when he cried after losing a toy truck. Like the teenager who hugged me when I worked a double shift just to pay for his senior pictures. No. He was silent, distant, hiding behind paperwork and a wife who smiled too much. I didn't recognize this version of him. But I wasn't going to wait for him to come around. The next day I opened a new bank account. Started the paperwork to revoke any power of attorney I might have accidentally signed last fall when Claudette offered to help me declutter my legal junk. And I asked Dana to help me get a full copy of all my medical records. If they were building a case to say I was losing my mind, I was going to get ahead of it. Because I knew who I was. I wasn't perfect. I was aging. Slower on my feet. Tired by 7 p.m. But I was not incompetent. I was not confused. And I most definitely was not going anywhere. They wanted me gone. Then they were going to have to push harder. But they had no idea how heavy I could be when I planted my feet. The mail started coming later than usual. At first, I thought it was the postal service. But then I noticed something. The sound of the mailbox opening at noon. But the mail not appearing inside until 3. I tested my theory by slipping a tiny piece of tape over the flap and writing a tiny pencil mark where it would break if opened. At 12:15 the tape was torn. But when I went to the mailbox at 3, there it was again. Sealed cleanly but without my mark. That night I confronted Matthew. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just asked, "Are you reading my mail before I see it?" He blinked. Then laughed. "What are you talking about, Mama?" "Don't lie to me," I said quietly. "I already know." His smile faltered. "You're being paranoid," he said. "No," I said. "I'm being observant." He rubbed the back of his neck and muttered something about stress at work and Claudie handling things. But the damage was done. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just letting Claudette lead. He was helping her. Maybe not with malice. Maybe not even with full understanding. But he wasn't stopping her either. And that made him just as dangerous. 2 days later, Claudette announced she had booked them a weekend away. "A little couple's retreat," she said. "You'll have the house to yourself." She smiled, but her eyes scanned me like she was calculating something. I smiled back. "That'll be nice." As soon as they left, I went to work. I searched their office drawer. Bottom file cabinet. Behind the bookshelf where Claudette kept her fake diploma. That's where I found it. A second set of papers. Another trust. One I hadn't seen before. This one was labeled, Marlene Health Transfer. Inside was language that chilled me to the bone. Words like long-term care authority. Words like involuntary placement. Words like evaluation due within 30 days. And at the bottom, a date. 3 weeks from now. I sat down hard on the floor, papers trembling in my hands. They weren't just waiting for me to fade out of their house. They were preparing to put me into a facility. One where I'd have no say. No keys. No access to my own name. And it would all be signed under the assumption that I was mentally deteriorating. They were building a case. Piece by piece. One doctor's note. One forgotten conversation. One missing prescription refill at a time. I took out my phone, snapped every page and emailed it to Dana. Then I made another call. To Lorraine. Marlene, she said. I need a witness, I told her. Someone who knows I'm not losing my mind. She paused. Then answered, Baby, I've known you for 30 years. You remember every hymn in that old red church book and every casserole recipe in the family. If anyone thinks you're fading, it's because they're scared of how much you still see. By the time Matthew and Claudette returned, I had locked my bedroom door. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because now I knew exactly what they were planning. And I had no intention of letting them get away with it. The next week I began to move like a shadow in my own house. I kept to myself. Smiled when necessary. Answered their questions with short, pleasant replies. I was invisible before, but now I made sure of it. Because people show their true selves when they think you're not watching. And I was watching everything. I started keeping a small voice recorder in my sweater pocket. Lorraine had suggested it. Dana helped me pick it out. It looked like a keychain. Every time Claudette said something sideways, I clicked it on. Like the time she said, "Don't forget to tell the doctor you've been hearing things again." Or when she told Matthew, "Her memory slips so often, I'm worried she'll burn the house down one day." And the worst one, "She's still here but not for long. I'm handling it." She said it in the hallway when she thought I was asleep. But I was sitting in the dark, listening through the vent. I saved every word. Let the device do the remembering, just in case they ever tried to say I was lying. That weekend I went to church. It was the first time in months. Lorraine sat beside me, her arm looped through mine like the old days. She whispered, "You ready to tell the pastor?" I nodded slowly. Our pastor wasn't just a man of the cloth. He was a retired family counselor with strong community ties and a sharp memory. He also ran a local program that helped seniors navigate elder law. After the service, I asked if we could speak privately. He led me to his office. I told him everything. He didn't interrupt. Just took notes and nodded gently. When I finished, he said, "Marlene, what they're doing may be illegal. At the very least, it's deeply unethical." Then he offered something I didn't expect. "We're hosting an elder law seminar here next week. Local press will be covering it. Would you consider speaking, sharing your story anonymously? We can protect your identity." I sat there quiet for a moment. Then I said, "No. I want them to know exactly who I am." He smiled, not out of amusement but out of something close to respect. "I'll make sure you have the microphone," he said. That week I went to the beauty parlor. Had my hair set. Wore the good earrings, the ones I hadn't worn since Matthew's wedding. When I walked up to that podium, I didn't shake. I didn't stutter. I said my name clearly, Marlene Joan Hayworth, 78 years old. And then I told them how it feels to be erased by the people you raised. I told them about fake trust accounts, missing medication, carefully planted rumors of confusion. And finally I said this. They were waiting for me to leave. They forgot that I know how to stay. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then it erupted in applause. Not because I was brave, but because every person in that room had seen a little of themselves in me. By the time I got home, Claudette was already pacing the kitchen. She had seen the clip online. It was already making the rounds. "Marlene," she said, "why would you?" I held up my hand. "Don't speak unless it's the truth," I said. She froze. I walked past her. Sat at the table. She didn't follow. Because for the first time I wasn't the one who felt small. Matthew didn't come home that night. He called once just before midnight. I didn't pick up. He didn't leave a message. The next morning, Claudette sat across from me at the table, pale and fidgety. Her usual confidence, the sharp way she corrected me when I forgot to close a cabinet or left crumbs on the counter, was gone. "What are you trying to do to this family?" she asked, her voice low. I looked her in the eye. "I'm protecting myself. Something you never thought I'd do." She scoffed, but I could see her lips twitching at the edges, like she couldn't decide whether to be angry or scared. "You don't understand how hard it's been managing everything." "Managing?" I repeated. "Or controlling?" Her face turned red. She pushed her chair back hard and left the room. Later that day, a woman from Adult Protective Services knocked on the door. I was expecting her. Dana had filed a report. The agency responded faster than I imagined. The woman's name was Patricia, soft-spoken but observant. We sat together in the living room while Claudette busied herself loudly in the kitchen, slamming cabinets and muttering under her breath. Patricia asked gentle questions. Had I felt unsafe? Had anyone tried to limit my freedom? Had I ever been denied access to money, food, or communication? I answered honestly. She took notes, nodded, and asked for a copy of the trust documents. I handed her the printed photos and recordings. Then I said something I didn't expect to come out of my mouth. "I don't want revenge. I just want peace." Patricia looked up, paused, and said, "Peace begins with space. And space begins with safety." She promised to file her report immediately. The next day, Claudette received a formal notice. She was under investigation for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Matthew came home that night. Stormed in, dropped his keys on the table, and demanded to talk. "Why are you doing this, Mama?" he asked, his voice thick with frustration. "Do you know what you're putting us through?" I stood slowly. "You mean what you and Claudette were putting me through for months?" He opened his mouth but said nothing. I walked over to the counter, picked up the pile of letters with my name scratched off the return address labels, and dropped them on the table between us. I was invisible in my own life. You stood there and let her twist my name, my house, my mind. And now that people are watching, you want to talk about stress. He looked like he had aged 5 years in 5 minutes. "I didn't know what she was doing," he said weakly. I stared at him, searching for the son I raised. "You didn't want to know," I said. "That's worse." He sat down heavily in the chair. "I don't know how to fix this." "I'm not asking you to," I said. He looked up, startled. I continued, "I'm fixing it myself. Already have. What happens next is up to you." Claudette didn't come downstairs the next morning. I heard her suitcase wheels bumping against the stairs. She didn't say goodbye. Didn't slam the door. Just left. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Patricia. "Claudette has agreed to leave the residence permanently," she said. "She's waiving any claim to the trust and withdrawing power of attorney filings. You're in the clear." I thanked her, hung up, and sat alone in the kitchen. Not in fear. Not in sadness. In relief. Because the house felt different. It didn't feel like a waiting room anymore. It felt like mine. The silence after Claudette left was different. It wasn't cold anymore. It wasn't the kind that made you feel like you were in the way, or a ghost sitting too long at someone else's table. It was warm. Clean. I woke up the next morning without dread in my chest for the first time in months. The sun streamed through the curtains just the way I used to like it. I made myself breakfast. Eggs over medium, half a grapefruit, and black coffee. No one watching me. No one correcting how I stirred the grits. Matthew came downstairs sometime after 10. He looked like a man walking around his childhood home, not the one he currently lived in. Uncomfortable. Hesitant. He sat across from me, fingers laced together. "Mama," he said. "She's gone." I nodded. "I know." He didn't say much after that. He just sat there like he wanted to apologize but didn't know how. I let the silence sit between us. Because some apologies don't come in words. Some have to be lived out. Earned. He finally asked, "Do you want me to move out too?" I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "I want you to decide what kind of man you are. That'll tell me everything I need to know." He nodded slowly. The next few days he tried. He mowed the lawn without being asked. Cooked dinner once, burned the roast, but I smiled anyway. He started leaving notes on the fridge. "Back by 6. Do you need anything?" But he didn't talk about Claudette. Not once. I didn't ask. Some things don't need reopening. I was sitting on the porch one evening when Lorraine came by. She brought lemon bars and that knowing look she always carried when she had news. "You're not going to believe this," she said, sitting beside me with a sigh. "That seminar you spoke at? The video has over 40,000 views online." I blinked. 40,000? She nodded, grinning. "Seniors all over the state are sending in their own stories. A few law offices have reached out. And get this, a councilwoman called. Wants to meet you." I didn't know what to say. Me, the woman who almost got locked away in silence, now being asked to speak? I shook my head and laughed softly. "I'm just trying to make it to bingo on Wednesday," I said. Lorraine bumped my shoulder. "Well, you're already winning the long game." That night I sat with my journal. I wrote everything down. How they tried to erase me. How I let myself believe I deserved to shrink. And how I finally stood up, and everything started growing again. I wrote a letter to myself. "Dear Marlene, you are not weak. You are not crazy. You are not alone. And you were never meant to disappear. Love, the version of you who finally came back." The moonlight spilled across the page as I signed it. I folded it, placed it in an envelope and tucked it between the pages of my Bible. A reminder of what it took to get here, and what I would never tolerate again. A week after Claudette left, a letter arrived. No return address. But I knew her handwriting. She always looped her LS a little too tightly. I held the envelope for a while before opening it. I read it slowly, carefully, word by word. She didn't apologize. Not really. She said things like, "I never meant to hurt you," and "I was just trying to create stability for our future." Then came the line that made me sit still. "I didn't think you'd fight back." There was not regret, not sorrow, surprise. She thought I was too old, too quiet, too soft-spoken to push against the tide she tried to drown me in. She thought I'd vanish like a shadow on the porch, not walk back into the light with my name intact. I folded the letter and dropped it into the trash. That chapter was closed. The next day I got a call from the local news station. They wanted to interview me about elder financial abuse and the rise in family-based manipulation. The reporter, a young woman named Betrayal, came to the house with a camera and kind eyes. She asked if I was nervous. I told her, not anymore. The interview aired that weekend. They used clips of me sitting at my kitchen table talking plainly like I would to a neighbor over pie. They showed old photos of me with my children, smiling in sun-drenched backyards. They played a recording of my church seminar, just the part where I said, "They didn't expect me to speak. So now I won't stop." After the segment aired, I got messages from strangers. A woman in Michigan whose son had tried to sell her car without asking. A man in Florida whose daughter blocked his phone and applied for guardianship. A retired schoolteacher who had been moved from her house to a back room until she stopped being a problem. I cried reading some of them. Not from sadness. From connection. They knew. They saw me. And more importantly, they now saw themselves. The following Sunday, Pastor Ray invited me to say a few words at service. I stepped up to the pulpit holding nothing but a folded piece of paper in my hands. I spoke about what it means to be forgotten in plain sight. To be told you're loved, while your name is scrubbed from the mailbox. I said, they told me I was fragile. But what they didn't realize is that the quietest wood is sometimes the strongest. When I sat down, people stood up. It wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement. The next morning, Matthew left for work with a packed lunch and a note he'd scribbled and stuck on the fridge. I'm listening now. Small steps. But they mattered. That afternoon, I stood by the window watching the neighborhood kids ride bikes up and down the sidewalk. Felt like life had crept back in. Not loud. Not rushed. Just steady. Mine again. I started getting invitations I never expected. The local senior center asked if I'd lead a monthly wisdom circle for women over 60. Women like me who had lived full lives but had stories still stuck in their throats. I said yes. The first meeting was small. 6 women. Nervous smiles. Folded hands. But when I told my story, the room went still. And then one by one they opened up. A woman named Lucille spoke about her daughter who refused to let her see her grandkids after she moved in. Another, Mildred, talked about how her son had slowly rerouted all her mail, drained her savings and blamed confusion every time she questioned him. By the end of that session we were all crying. But not from pity. From release. From knowing we weren't the only ones. That night I journaled something new. This pain isn't just mine. But maybe if I speak it loud enough I can help loosen it from someone else's chest. I wasn't trying to be an advocate. I just didn't want anyone else to feel the way I had. Unseen, unheard, disposable. The following week, the county office invited me to sit on their Senior Protection Advisory Board. I sat at a long table surrounded by attorneys, social workers, community leaders. And they listened to me. A woman they might have ignored just months ago. Now they leaned in when I spoke. Just from my thoughts. Wrote down my words. Even the mayor called once. She wanted to use my story in their next elder care campaign. When she asked if she could quote me I said yes. But make sure they hear this, I told her. Silence isn't safety. It's survival. And it only lasts until someone finally says, enough. Meanwhile at home Matthew kept trying. He made small changes. He asked questions about my day. Left the thermostat at the setting I liked. Started cooking dinner once a week. He still burned things but I didn't complain. And then one night he surprised me. He came home holding a dusty photo album I hadn't seen in years. I found this in the garage, he said. Thought maybe we could go through it. We sat at the kitchen table flipping through pages. There he was at 6, missing a tooth and grinning wide. Tasha in her spelling bee dress. Even Claudette, smiling in that picture from the day they bought their first home. I saw how much had changed, but I also saw what was worth saving. Thank you, I said. He looked down. I didn't protect you. No, I said. But you're here now. And you're trying. We turned the page. A photo of me holding baby Matthew, wrapped in a blue blanket. I was younger than you are now in this picture, I whispered. He smiled, quiet and heavy. You looked tired. I said. But I never once thought of walking away. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because we both understood what that meant. I don't lock my bedroom door anymore. The house feels safe again. Not just because Claudette is gone, but because I'm no longer living in fear of being erased. I spend my mornings in the garden now. The same garden she once said was too much work for someone my age. The marigolds are blooming. So are the tomatoes. There's something healing about pulling weeds with your own hands, like you're uprooting things from inside yourself too. Matthew offered to help one morning but I waved him off. This is something I need to do myself, I said. He smiled. Okay, Mama. Mama. Not Marlene. Not her. Just Mama. He hadn't said it that way in months. Maybe years. That night he made dinner. Real dinner. Baked chicken, cornbread and green beans the way I used to make them. He even called to ask me what seasoning I used. When we sat down to eat he cleared his throat. There's something I want to say. I looked at him. I should have stopped her, he said. From the beginning. I should have protected you the way you always protected me. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Claudette told me it was temporary. Said we needed to manage your care, get you into a better environment. But I knew it was wrong. Deep down I knew. I just didn't want to deal with it. And that's on me. So I said nothing. Because I wanted him to finish. I let you down. I won't do it again. Finally I spoke. You can't undo what's done, Matthew. But you can decide who you'll be from here. He nodded slowly. I want to be your son again. The kind you used to be proud of. That was the moment the tightness in my chest began to loosen. I didn't hug him. We weren't there yet. But I passed him the cornbread and said, try not to burn it next time. He laughed. I'll do my best. We ate quietly like we were building something. Not from scratch but from the broken pieces we'd chosen to gather. The next morning I went to the courthouse with Dana. We filed new paperwork. My own power of attorney, my own estate documents, my own final wishes. Everything in my own name. As it should have been all along. When we walked out into the sunlight, Dana said, "You've come full circle." I looked up at the sky. No, I said. I made a new one. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. About reclaiming what I was told I'd lost. My voice, my rights, my space. And making it clear I was never going to let it go again. Later that week, I received one last letter. This one wasn't from Claudette. It was from a woman in Ohio. 68. She had watched the interview, read the article, listened to my story. She wrote, I thought I was alone. I thought my children were right when they told me I was slipping. But I'm not. I know now. You reminded me. Thank you. I folded the letter and put it in my journal, right beside my own, because our stories deserve to be written down, not just to remember the pain, but to celebrate how we overcame it. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt silenced, if you've ever been told you were no longer needed, if you've ever sat in a quiet room and wondered when you disappeared, let me say this. You are still here, and you still matter, and you have the right to take your life back. One voice at a time. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear they are not alone, and never were.